Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Hi, Nat Doig here. Just a heads up that today's episode deals with World War II history, so there are some descriptions of violence. There is also a dramatisation of a house fire right at the start of this episode. Welcome to Weird in the Wade, a podcast about all that's weird, wonderful, and a little off-kilter in the town of Biggleswade in Bedfordshire and its surrounding area. If you like your history with a pinch of the paranormal and your supernatural stories with some historical context, then this is the podcast for you. Whether it's haunted pubs or the mystery of Tempsford. Grab a cuppa, sit back, and let me take you on a journey into the weird. It's Friday the 11th of November 1898, Tempsford Hall, Bedfordshire. Major William Dugald Stewart and his wife Millicent are dining with a couple of guests, Millicent's brother, Buckley Hughes, and the Chief Constable of Bedfordshire Police, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Jocelyn. They are at the start of a quiet shooting weekend, a relaxed and intimate affair. It will be nothing like the shooting party of the previous weekend, which attracted 19 guests to the hall. And later, they will marvel in horror at what might have occurred if more guests had been present at the hall on the night of the 11th and the morning of the 12th of November. But as it is such a small gathering, they have an early night. Mrs. Stewart retires to bed before the men. She checks on her 3-year-old son, Esme, fast asleep, as is his nurse. The Major, his brother-in-law, and the Chief Constable, after partaking in brandy and cigars, also retire to bed. All of the household, including servants, are fast asleep before midnight. In the dead of night, Buckley Hughes wakes. He can hear a strange crackling sound. His first thought is that someone is breaking into the dining room below, rattling the windows. He leaps out of bed. He rushes to the window, and then he realises that the noise is not due to burglars. He can smell smoke and hear the cracking of burning wood. It is the worst fear of anyone from this time. Fire. The house is on fire. He rushes to rouse his sister and the Major in a room near to his. On stepping out into the landing, he is already met with smoke and sees flames licking at the stairs, blocking his escape route. He bursts into his sister's room, wakes her and the Major. We know that at this point, the Major entrusts the safety of his wife to her brother. Major Stewart rushes into the dark, smoke-choked heat of that hallway, leaving his wife and brother-in-law behind. The Major begins to yell and shout to rouse the servants and his guest, Colonel Jocelyn.
Fire!
Millicent grabs hold of her brother, imploring him to go and fetch her son and his nurse. Her fingers grip Buckley's arms, her nails driving into his skin.
But you have to save him, Bucky! You have to!
But Buckley knows that that route to the nursery on the floor above is engulfed in flames, that the thick smoke will no doubt kill them before any flames do. He must get his sister and himself out of the house. Then he can attempt to get to the nursery from the opposite side of the hall. but Millicent will not hear it.
If you won't go, I will.
She rushes to the door, but Buckley pulls her back.
Stop, Millie. Stop this now. Listen to me.
He hurriedly explains his plan, that the quickest and safest route to his nephew is from outside of the hall, not from within it. He tasks Millicent with tearing up bedsheets and tying them together to make a makeshift rope ladder for her to climb down to the outside. This they do, and Millicent, in her nightgown, climbs down out of the burning house onto the lawn below, her brother holding the bedsheet ladder firm. Buckley now searches, scanning the room for something heavy enough to take his weight that he can tie this makeshift ladder to. He chooses a large ornate mirror which is firmly fixed to the wall and makes his own escape out of the hall. On the lawn with his sister, they run around to the front of the house to where the nursery window is open on the second floor. The window is above the front door's portico or porch. The nurse, Mrs. Bradbury, is leaning out of the nursery window. Flames can be seen behind her. Millicent and Buckley are dismayed. A sharp sting of despair cuts through the adrenaline which has been surging through Millicent's body. Fear claws at her insides. She swoons, but with some effort remains on her feet. The nurse calls down to them.
I cannot get out. I can only jump. No, don't jump, please.
Millicent calls. The nurse and her 3-year-old boy will surely die if they jump. Buckley cuts through his sister's screams of no.
No.
Don't jump. Nurse Bradbury, I'm coming to you.
And in his pyjamas and with bare feet, he begins to climb. He uses a sturdy drain pipe at the side of the portico and his bare toes in the crevices between the bricks for grip. And he climbs like a spider up the side of the portico and onto the roof. He later says if you had asked him before that night if he could climb up the wall, he'd have laughed and said,
Of course not. That would be impossible.
On the roof of the porch, he is now closer to the nurse and his nephew. Using a blanket thrown down to him, he climbs further until he can reach the tiny boy, who he grabs hold of. Buckley is back on the roof of the porch with his nephew safe within seconds, though it feels like hours. Below him now is a crowd, not just his sister. Servants have appeared with a large blanket which the boy is thrown down into and safely caught. He is placed into the trembling arms of Millicent as another blanket is wrapped around them both. The nurse now must jump onto the porch roof. She takes a leap but lands heavily and hurts her leg and ankle, but she is safe from the fire. A small ladder from one of the garden sheds has been brought, and Buckley helps the nurse down from the portico to safety. Meanwhile, inside the house, the fire is raging. Major Stewart runs out into the dark, smoke-filled landing. He manages to reach one of the servants' bells, and he rings it urgently, hoping it will wake anyone still sleeping. He also bellows, for good measure, though the gulps of hot, smoky air that he breathes in order to yell may have been a mistake.
Fire! 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 Fire!
As he fights his way towards his guest's bedroom, he faces a wall of heat and a darkness that blinds him. The smoke is so thick, choking up his lungs. He covers his mouth with the collar of his pyjamas, but it does no good. Groping with his other hand, he inches forwards, painfully slowly. His head spins. His skin prickles with heat. Sweat stings his eyes. The blackness around him is solid. The heat is like a heavy sack, smothering him, pushes him backwards and down, crushing him until he feels no more. Colonel Frederick Jocelyn, Chief Constable of Bedfordshire Police, is in a separate wing of the house to the Stewarts and Mr. Hughes, directly below the nursery as it happens. But he awakes on hearing the Major's bellows of fire and the bell ringing. He leaps out of bed and he runs to the door. On opening it, he finds the corridor black and smoke-choked. The Chief Constable is not in the best of health. It is why he has been spending time in North Bedfordshire countryside to recuperate and take in the country air. Instead, he is met with a lungful of smoke. Groping along the wall, he heads in the direction of the stairs, only to find them engulfed in flames. The heat hits him like a punch in the face. He staggers backwards, his ears full of the rushing fire and smoke. and spitting and splitting of wood. There are cracks and pops and glass smashes from somewhere he cannot tell. He retraces his steps and in doing so trips over a lump on the floor. He gropes to find out what has tripped him and realises it is the body of his host, Major Stewart. The Major is unconscious. The Chief Constable cannot rouse him, and so he drags the Major along with him. Jocelyn has stayed at the house frequently enough to know there is another staircase to the north, and he heads in that direction with the dead weight of the Major behind him. The heat is more intense than anything Jocelyn has ever felt. He feels as if he is being roasted in an oven, but he knows it is the smoke that kills, that it is the smoke that has rendered his friend unconscious. Twice, as he heaves the Major along the corridor behind him, Jocelyn has to leave his burden and open a bedroom door to gulp in some less smoky air. Somehow Jocelyn finds the staircase and drags the Major down the stairs one step at a time. Once in the hall at the bottom of the stairs, Jocelyn begins to call for help. The head housemaid, Mrs. Dorcas, and Mr. Hughes hear the Chief Constable's cries and they rush to his aid. With the help of one of the footmen, both Jocelyn and the Major are taken to safety on the lawn. The Major slowly begins to revive. Some of the servants attempt to re-enter the house, not realising in the confusion that Mrs. Bradbury, the nurse, and little Esme are safe. Meanwhile, the lady's maid, Miss Chapman, runs barefoot to the house of Mr. Abney, the steward. He is in charge of the fire engine at Tempsford. Rather ironically and tragically, however, the fire engine and some of its apparatus are housed in the hall, and so are burning up in the flames. But Mr. Abney has some equipment available, and a messenger is sent to Sandy and Biggleswade to fetch more engines. Once everyone is accounted for safe from the inferno, there is an attempt to rescue at least some of the treasures which reside in the hall. Mr. Smith, the butler, and George Wainwright, the groom, manage to break into the drawing room through a window. Their mission is to recover as many paintings as possible, using any implements to hand. An axe and a shovel are used. They cut away the larger paintings from their frames. A portrait of Queen Anne and one of William Penn, for whom Pennsylvania is named, are saved, along with every other painting from the drawing room. But many valuable and historic items from the hall are lost to the flames forever, including a walking stick which had belonged to King Charles I, and another William Penn relic, a piece of the oak beneath which he signed a peace and friendship agreement with the Lenape Turtle clan in 1865. Also surprisingly, what was said to be the world's largest crystal ball was also destroyed in the fire. The thought of a crystal ball at a house with such a reputation for the uncanny and strange shouldn't really be surprising, but I am not certain it was ever used in a supernatural way by anyone. The household and servants are joined on the lawn by firefighters from Biggleswade and Sandy, as well as local villagers who rushed to help. A police jacket is used to wrap around one of the servant girls who is shivering in her nightdress. The Stewarts have lost their home, but thankfully they are well insured. Many of the servants lose everything, including the cook, whose life savings, a bag of gold, is never recovered from the smouldering ruins. It is one of the most devastating fires of the 19th century within a country manor. Photographs taken in the days after the fire show a husk of ragged walls, crumbling masonry, gaping doorways with broken and burnt wood spewing out of them, empty windows and towering but blackened chimneys, all against a backdrop of mist rolling off the Ouse and Ivor rivers. The new Tempsford Hall would take 5 years to build and would be built in the charred footprint of the former home. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. I'm Nat Toig, and today we are back in Tempsford, the tiny village just a few miles north of Sandy and Biggleswade in Bedfordshire. You don't have to have listened to the last episode to enjoy this one, but you may want to go back and listen to it anyway, as it's about a most remarkable poltergeist haunting at Tempsford Hall in the 1840s. In today's episode, we're going to discover the fortunes of Tempsford Hall in the 20th and 21st centuries. the new hall which was built after that devastating fire I just described. We're going to focus on Tempsford's role during World War II, when the hall was used as a hospital and the grounds were commandeered for top secret intelligence work. I visit the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, barn at Gibraltar Farm, which is now a memorial and folk museum to the members of the SOE and their resistance work against the Nazis. After this episode, and thank you for your patience in waiting for it, Weird and the Wade will be on a short break. But don't worry, I will be back at the start of July with 6 more episodes for you, including episodes about a Victorian murder in Bedford, which might be linked to some of the haunting activity at the Higgins Museum. There's going to be an episode about the Rose Pub in Biggleswade and the town's Tudor and Jacobean haunted history. Then there's going to be one on the disappearance of Glenn Miller and the Flying Duchess from Bedfordshire airfields. Ampthill Castle and the haunting of Houghton House ruins is going to be another episode. Also going to have a look at more water ghosts and monsters, including the Gannel Crake in Newquay. And we're also going to celebrate Pride Month with an exploration of queer, in all senses of the word, folklore in the Fens. So I really hope you're going to enjoy those episodes over the summer. I'll still be posting while I'm on my break in June on social media and the show blog. So do keep in touch with the show that way until I am back in July. But back to Tempsford. The fire. That fire really was one of the most devastating country house fires in the 19th century. The house was gutted. It took 5 years for its replacement to be built, and that house rose out of the footprint of the original hall. The cellars and some of the chimneys were reused in the building of the new hall. The Stewart family continued to live there once it was rebuilt and appear in the 1921 census at Tempsford Hall. Now, I could write such a detailed account of that night of the fire thanks to so many newspaper and magazine articles from the time. There was even a special article in Country Living magazine with mournful photographs of the ruins. The role of Frederick Jocelyn, Chief Constable of Beds Police, was celebrated. His bravery in rescuing the Major. His heroics took up much of the reporting about the fire. The cause of the fire remains a mystery. There was speculation about old wood in one of the chimneys catching alight, but nothing conclusively was proved. The rapidity of the flames taking hold was astonishing, but seemed to be accounted for by natural causes. But it seems within a matter of minutes, the centre of the house was engulfed. Now, the fact that everyone survived and that the only injuries were to Nurse Bradbury from her jump and some minor burns on one of the maids was seen as a miracle. Indeed, if there had been 19 guests plus extra servants staying at the hall as there had been the weekend before, the outcome would have been surely very, very different. The hall that stands today in Tempsford is the one that was rebuilt by Major Stewart, and there are photos on the show blog of how it looks today. But more on that later. Before World War II, the hall's history continued to be eventful in that way that many manor houses' histories are. Think Downton Abbey on a slightly smaller scale. In 1905, a tragic scandal rocked the hall when a maid shocked the household by giving birth whilst at work. The hall's electrician, the father of her baby, took poison in an attempt to end his life the very same day. It seems the maid concealed her pregnancy from everyone, including the father, until the baby was born. And you can see why she did this, because after she gave birth, she was immediately dismissed by the Stewarts, and the electrician, who recovered from his poisoning, ran off back to his parents' home in Oxfordshire, leaving her destitute. Now, she must have been a determined and resourceful young woman, as she took the father of her baby to court and won maintenance from him. During World War I, prisoners of war were housed in the grounds of Tempsford Hall. And sometime after the war, Major Stewart's daughter and Mrs. Wynne became the main resident of Tempsford Hall. Now, I have read that Mrs. Wynne on at least one occasion saw an apparition in her home, but firm proof of this really is hard to come by. And I do wonder if maybe there's been some confusion in the reports, saying that Mrs. Wynne saw the ghost, when really it's the reports from Mrs. Elliot back in the 1840s. But maybe Mrs. Wynne did see an apparition. But she did have good reason to be, shall we say, apprehensive living at the Hall, though. In the 1930s, a daring Bonnie and Clyde type couple burgled Tempsford Hall. Now, they were caught afterwards near Stevenage, leading to a sensational trial where they both blamed the other for being the mastermind behind the heist. Now, if you'd like to hear more about these stories, then check out the show blog, where it will explain where you can hear more about them. The Second World War. Even if you didn't know when World War II took place, you could guess that something was different between 1939 and 1945 at Tempsford Hall by looking at how often it was mentioned in the newspapers. Now, during the first half of the 20th century, most years the hall appears in newspaper articles between 7 and 10 times, often more. And these articles are about flower shows, garden openings, deaths, marriages or births at the hall. Sometimes they're stories about parties being held there, or sometimes about crime, poachers, robberies. But from 1940 to 1946, there are just 1 or 2 articles each year. It's as if the hall suddenly doesn't want to exist or remind people that it does. And the articles that do appear relate to the grounds of Tempsford Hall, how a shed is now being repurposed to store equipment, or a tranche of land will now be used for growing vegetables. The kinds of articles that have to be published due to planning rules, but also ensure that locals don't come snooping to see why certain sheds or pieces of land are now cordoned off. Just before the war, in 1939, Mrs. Wynne leases out the hall to a Dr. Hale who opens a clinic at Tempsford Hall for studying and innovating treatment in different diseases, including arthritis. Now, at first I thought this might have been a ruse. It happened so close to the war starting. But it seems that this doctor and his clinic are genuine. The clinic continues operating out of Tempsford Hall after the war for at least a decade. But it was very convenient and fortunate that a clinic with state-of-the-art X-ray equipment, therapy rooms, and operating theatre opened so close to the start of the Second World War at such an important site for the Allies' efforts against the Nazis. RAF Tempsford. So why suddenly the nothing to see here attitude towards Tempsford Hall and its grounds? Well, that was because Tempsford was quite possibly the most secret airfield in World War II. Its history is fascinating on so many levels. Tempsford was not a great site for an airfield. The land around Tempsford is boggy, prone to fog and flooding because of its closeness to the rivers Great Ouse and Ivel. But that was the whole point. The Ministry of Defence sought advice from the magician Jasper Maestlin, whose father I mentioned in the Prestonville horror case. Maestlin Sr. worked with other magicians to investigate hauntings to find rational and sceptical explanations for them back in the 1900s. RAF Tempsford was designed by Maestlin Jr. to hide in plain sight. Gibraltar Farm on the edge of Tempsford to the east of the Great North Road and East Coast Main Lines was the perfect slice of English countryside which could be repurposed for the clandestine work of the Special Operations Executive. Work began in 1940, and in 1941 the airfield opened under 3 Group, who were responsible for SOE operations until 1945. RAF Tempsford became home to 138 and 161 Special Duties Squadrons. In 1942, that first involved low-level ammunition drops to the resistance forces by the light of the moon alone. Before D-Day, the squadrons in Tempsford supplied materials to resistance forces all over Europe. During World War II, 138 Squadron delivered 995 agents, 29,000 containers, 10,000 packages in the course of 2,494 sorties, with the loss of 70 aircraft. The Special Operations Executive. What was the SOE? It was set up by Churchill in July 1940, and in Churchill's its role was to set Europe ablaze. Their mission was sabotage and subversion. The SOE operatives were not spies, but secret agents whose role it was to slow down the German war effort by means of sabotage and to assist the resistance in occupied territories. Nearly 400 agents were sent into Nazi-occupied territory, around 39 of whom were women trained in the UK. Now, it is difficult to pin down the exact number of operatives, partly because the work was so secret. Also, some women were recruited outside of the UK, either within established resistance circuits or in other branches of the military already abroad. As you just heard, nearly 1,000 agents took off from RAF Tempsford, but some of those agents made their way back to the UK after completing missions and were sent back on new missions into Europe. In total, I think the number of women SOE agents could be as many as 55, but 39 were trained for certain in the UK and left the country via RAF Tempsford. The SOE were considered by some at the time to be ungentlemanly. Now, this wasn't just because women were active within the SOE, but because their actions were clandestine, were seen as not fair to be fighting in that way. Churchill and the founders of the SOE, however, realised that traditional approaches to warfare alone were not going to work against the Nazis. Sabotage and resistance were needed behind enemy lines. The types of sabotage and subversion performed and facilitated by the SOE agents in Nazi-occupied Europe included bombing bridges and railway lines, trains and factories, encouraging active revolt or guerrilla warfare, cutting telephone lines. This happened especially in the run-up to D-Day, so that the Germans had to rely on wireless communications, which could be overheard and deciphered by the Allies thanks to cracking the Enigma code. Agents needed to be able to pass as local to these countries, so they had to have excellent language skills. They also needed to move under the radar, avoiding suspicion. And it was realised within the first year of operations that women were often viewed as less suspicious than men. Women were underestimated by both sides within the war. Sexism was ingrained within British and European culture. Women were considered to be too innocent and nurturing to be natural fighters. They were givers of life, not takers of it, was a common refrain. However, the genius of the SOE was to exploit the Nazis' own particular flavour of sexism against them. So in 1942, the first women SOE operatives were deployed. They were recruited in the same way as men, which was mostly through other arms of the military. Many came via the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, because they were already skilled wireless or radio operators. However, one of the first women recruited, Yvonne Riddler, was found when a recruiting officer overheard her speaking French in the bar where she worked. Now, the women's backgrounds were diverse, from shop girls, as they were known at the time, who worked in Woolworths, to a Polish countess, and their ages ranged from teenagers to the eldest at 55. One of the women deployed, Virginia Hall, had a prosthetic leg from a pre-war shooting accident. And later, I'll tell you about SOE operative Noor Inayat Khan, who was a Muslim. Their training was also the same as that given to the male agents, including firearms use, physical fitness and Morse code. They were taught how to survive off the land, how to use explosives and other weapons training, including close combat and, I quote, silent killing. The women were also taught how to parachute. And this training happened in places all over the country, from the New Forest to Manchester, Surrey and Oxfordshire. Their, and I quote here, finishing school was in Beaulieu, where they were taught how to resist interrogation. The women of the SOE were the first to be allowed to bear arms in the British Armed Forces. They were placed in the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, or Fanny for short, no laughing at the back please, and being part of a military department and having a uniform, even if they couldn't wear it when working, was hoped to give them protection under the Geneva Convention if they became prisoners of war. And sadly, many did become POWs. Some of the women were caught by sheer accident, whilst others were turned in for money, or even revenge and jealousy relating to love affairs. Many were never captured. Once captured, the women were brutally interrogated and tortured. The plan for all SOE operatives was to withstand torture for 24 or ideally 48 hours to give time for their resistance circuit to disband and hide. There is no evidence that any of the women gave in to the torture, which included beatings, sleep deprivation, exposure to extreme heat and cold, as well as blinding lights being shone in their eyes. The women were sent to prisoner of war camps, including the women-only camp at Ravensbrück. They were forced to dig roads or work in factories when they were in these camps. The camps were lice-infested, freezing in the winter, and rife with disease. Some of the SOE women who were caught were executed. Some were murdered in concentration camps. The Nazis treated resistance fighters particularly harshly, with a campaign of what they called night and fog, disappearing resistance operatives without a trace. After the war, Vera Atkins, who was one of the SOE recruiters, toiled tirelessly to piece together what happened to these women, the ones who did not return from the war. 91 men and 13 women did not return. They were told during their training that they had a 50-50 chance of survival, but thankfully 2/3 of them, in fact, made it home.
Whatever your thing, it could be anything. Canva helps you make that thing a thing. Canva is a simple online tool thing. It's a way to design with our magic AI tool things. You can social media your thing, generate images or videos of your thing, make decks for presentations to show your thing. Whatever needs to be done for your thing, Canva can make it an even better and bigger thing. Canva, the thing that makes anything a thing.
I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Cocktails up here feel just right. Is Cambria amazing? All right. Bring a date, your team, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com. See you on the roof.
The best summer memories are made outside, and LL Bean has the clothing and gear you need to make these memories. Their effortless styles are created for summers spent outside with family and friends. Like hand-sewn boat shoes, coastal cotton sweaters, rugged polos, and, of course, the iconic Boatin' Tote, which has been made right here in Maine since 1944. LL Bean. Be an outsider. Visit llbean.com to learn more.
The barn. At Tempsford today stands a museum to the SOE. It's within a barn, a place every SOE agent who left the UK from Tempsford has stood in. A place most definitely haunted, not by spirits perhaps, but by the memory of the brave women and men of the SOE. Haunted also by the thought of what our lives would be like today if the Nazis had won. I, for one, would not be alive if that was the case. The Nazis would not have tolerated my disability, especially as it most likely is a genetic mutation that caused it. I visited the memorial with my friend Fliss exactly a year ago on a blisteringly hot day and recorded for the podcast my impressions and a description of this wonderful museum. It's the last day of May and it's a beautiful late spring, early summer day. You can probably hear the insects buzzing, the birds are cheeping. There's definitely birds nesting here, and I am in the barn at Tempsford, which was known as Gibraltar Farm at the time. And it's a beautiful old barn. It has the most amazing ceiling. I'll describe the barn in a moment, but this barn was top secret during World War II. Even locals didn't know about it. And the reason it was top secret was that this was where the SOE were based. They were being flown from here, from RAF Tempsford, to France, across enemy lines, in order to work as part of the resistance. Before they would embark on their perilous journey, they would make the rather pleasant journey across the fields to this barn in order to be issued their equipment. So every single person who was then flown across enemy lines as part of the resistance against Nazi Germany would have come here to pick up their equipment. Now, RAF Tempsford is no longer an active RAF station or airfield, although you can still see the remnants of it, and it is still marked on the maps. Even on Google Maps, it's marked as RAF Tempsford as if it is still in existence and still being used. This barn became a kind of unofficial memorial and museum to remember these brave men and women who played such an important but secret role during the war. And when you come here today, it is, one, extremely peaceful. You do have to, the nearest road is a good sort of 5-10 minutes walk away. You can, in the distance, hear the A1 if the wind is in the right direction, and you can hear the occasional aeroplane fly overhead. Sometimes it's an actual Spitfire from the Shuttleworth collection that you hear. But other than that, it is extremely peaceful. The barn itself is open. That surprised me. I thought there'd be a door and you would have to sort of open the door. There was a pheasant, just to prove that we're in the middle of the countryside. Yeah, I assumed there'd be a door and that maybe even you'd have to go and collect a key from someone. But that is not the case. The door is open. There isn't a door. It's literally an open side of the barn. And the barn is very old. The roof is amazing. It reminds me of a barn that would be described in a Thomas Hardy novel. If anybody has read Far From the Madding Crowd, there is a chapter devoted to a barn not dissimilar to this barn. And when you come in here today, there are still sort of shelves and brick sort of shelving, which I wonder if actually was used in the war for storing the equipment that the people were going to be issued with before they went on one of their dangerous missions. But now these little alcoves and shelves are full of memorial tributes to those people who set off from here all those years ago. And as I said, many of them were women, so there is a lot of information here, and some of it is really old and has been pinned on ancient looking notice boards, and there's old photographs faded with time. I mean, one, it's incredibly unofficial. It looks like a folk memories have all been collected. There's old poppies that people have pinned here and that children have clearly drawn. You've got the old photographs, you've got explanations about who the people were that used this barn. You've got photographs with people's names on them, pieces of paper just pinned to a board here, which is so faded I've had to take a photograph of it to be able to read. There are some newer things which clearly have been put in here recently, nice clean laminated information that has been added. There's a lot of poppy wreaths, and clearly at Remembrance Day people are coming here to remember. But what is lovely is, although there are official plaques explaining why this barn is here and why it is a memorial, so much of it has been brought here by the relatives and the descendants of those who used this barn in the Second World War. There's books that people have left. Here's a book with pictures in it, and it's about clandestine parachute pickup operations, and it's open to the section about 161 Squadron. We've got a section which is dedicated to the Polish army and Polish personnel. And it says here, the Polish SOE section. And it explains that it was really the importance of Tempsford Airfield
became apparent because of its vital link between the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, and the RAF's Special Duties Squadrons. Audley End became the principal training school for the SOE's Polish section between 1942 and 44. After the Polish operatives had successfully completed their specialist training and instructions, they were bound for secret missions in their homeland. These were the famous, the Silent and Unseen, an elite troop of the Home Army specialising in sabotage, guerrilla warfare, communications, intelligence, commanding troops, aviation, armoured weapons, and document forgery. In total, 158 Polish Special Operations Executive, Silent and Unseen, took off from Tempsford Airfield to be dropped by parachute into occupied Poland. And there is a photograph here of all 158 of them. People I know that have visited here and have told me about this memorial, this barn, have said to me it's like a pilgrimage to come here. Even if, you're just walking that sort of 5-minute, 10-minute walk up from the road, it feels like a pilgrimage, and it really does. It's somewhere that I've wanted to visit for a very long time as soon as I found out about it. And I really do see why it is such a special place. And also a place that, you don't want to see in a way changed, for it to become kind of more, commercial or sanitised, or it's kind of perfect as it is. It's kind of clandestine, which of course was how they were all having to operate. Finally, one of the reasons I really wanted to visit here was because when I was a student at university, so I was very young, I think I must have been about 19, I watched a TV programme on daytime TV, which was still quite a novelty back then in the 90s. I think it was on BBC Two, and it was about the SOE, and it was about the women of the SOE, and it was about a woman called Pearl. And I was so impressed by this programme and about what she did in France as a spy, that I said that if I ever had a daughter, her middle name was going to be Pearl. Well, I haven't ever had a daughter, but I've always remembered that, and came into the barn, and one of the first pictures and information there is on one of the really old notice boards is about Pearl. So I will try and find her story and tell it to you in this episode, because it impressed me so much back when I was 19.
Bliss commented on our visit to the barn of just how perfectly English the setting is. Surrounded by dog roses, stately trees and rambling hedgerows, the open fields sloping down eventually to the rivers Ivel and Ouse, and before you reached the rivers, there was the grand old house of Tempsford Hall. If this was going to be the last piece of England you ever saw, then it was a most bucolic sight. The kind of green and pleasant land where you'd hear the thwack of a cricket ball on bat in the summer. A mythical place of mists in the autumn and twinkling Christmas lights at Tempsford Hall in the dark of deep winter, where Plough Monday and maypole dancing was still celebrated. A place worth protecting. On the other side of Tempsford today, the west side of the A1, there is a beautiful memorial to the women of the Special Operations Executive. So I do recommend that if you visit Tempsford, visit the barn, but also go to the other side of Tempsford and have a look at that wonderful memorial. Again, there are pictures on the show blog. The women of the SOE. As I mentioned whilst in the barn, I first became aware of the SOE's role in World War II when I was a student, and it was the story of Pearl Witherington which stayed with me. So I'd like to tell you a little more about her life and that of another SOE agent, Pearl. Pearl Witherington is remembered as one of the most successful female agents of all time. She was born in June 1914 and christened Cecile Pearl Witherington. She was brought up in France by British parents. Now, Pearl had to step up and take on responsibilities during her childhood, as her father was an alcoholic who squandered the family's money. And as a consequence, Pearl said that she had no childhood. When the Nazis invaded France, Pearl was working at the British Embassy, and at the time she was engaged to a Frenchman, Henri, who was called up by the French army, but he was soon captured by the Germans. Pearl, her mother and sisters escaped France by a gruelling journey which took them over a year through Spain, Portugal and Gibraltar. Once they were safe in Britain, Pearl and her sisters began working for the WAF. Somehow, Pearl got word that her fiancé Henri had escaped and he was now working for the resistance in France. One of Pearl's friends, Maurice Southgate, wanted to get back to his wife, who was also trapped in France, and so together they felt that they could do more for the war effort in France than they could in the UK. Pearl's flawless Parisian accent was a real asset to her when she joined the SOE, along with her friend Maurice. She was described as a cool and resourceful and extremely determined by her instructors, who also commented that she was, and I quote, "probably the best shot, male or female, we have yet had." Pearl herself reflected, "Deep down inside me, I'm a very shy person, but I've also had a lot of responsibilities ever since I was quite small. So I thought, well, this is something I feel I can do." Pearl was a confident parachutist, and in September 1942 she landed in France, where she connected with the resistance, including her fiancé Henri. One of Pearl's roles was as a courier. Her cover was that of a travelling cosmetics saleswoman on her bicycle. In fact, she was delivering weapons, food and money. Sometimes she would even lead the weapons training as well. In 1944, Maurice Southgate, the resistance network leader, was arrested, and he was taken to Buchenwald concentration camp. Pearl now assumed a leadership role for the northern section of the resistance. She renamed it Wrestler Network, and at its height there were 1,500 French resistance fighters within it. The Nazis put a 1 million franc bounty on Pearl's head, worth today more than 500,000. Pearl and her resistance fighters fought battles with the Nazis. They disrupted key railway lines more than 800 times, and Pearl also oversaw the surrender of 18,000 German troops when France was liberated. Pearl was reunited with her fiancé Henri shortly after they returned to Britain, where they married. Pearl also reunited with her friend Maurice Southgate after the war, as he was one of only 4 agents who survived the German concentration camp. Pearl, however, was not impressed with the response she and her fellow women SOE agents received after the war. She was recommended for a military cross, but was turned down because she was a woman. Instead, she was offered the civil division or version of the award, an MBE. Her response was this: "There was nothing remotely civil about what I did. I didn't sit behind a desk all day. I do consider it to be most unjust to be given a civilian decoration. Our training, which we did with the men, was purely military, and as women we were expected to replace them in the field," which of course she did with great success. She was eventually awarded a CBE, but at the age of 92 in 2006, Pearl was finally awarded her parachute wings, which meant more to her than any other award, as she explained to a BBC journalist at the time. "As a woman, I carried out 3 parachute training jumps and the 4th was operational. But the chaps did 4 training jumps and the 5th was operational, and you only got your wings after a total of 5 jumps. So I was not entitled. And for 63 years, I have been moaning to anybody who would listen because I thought it was an injustice." On her role in the SOE, Pearl also said, "It was a complete accident that I ended up leading 1,500 resistance fighters. I was not a military person. I was supposed to be a courier, but I ended up having to use whatever sense I had. But I clearly didn't do this just on my own." Noor Inayat Khan. I mentioned earlier that one of the SOE agents was a Muslim. The agent was Noor Inayat Khan. Her father was from India and her mother an American from Albuquerque. Noor was born in Russia, grew up partly in Britain and then in France. She was a truly international woman. In many ways, her story is different to Pearl's, but in some respects, it is similar. Noor, like Pearl, took on extra responsibilities as a child. Her father, who is credited as bringing the Sufism tradition to the West, died when Noor was only 7 years old, and she took on responsibility for looking after her grieving mother and siblings after his death. Contrary to what one SOE assessor famously said of Noor, that she was Not overburdened with brains, but we don't need brains. Noor studied psychology and was a successful writer, having books published in French and English. She was also one of World War II's most proficient and efficient wireless operators. In 1940, Noor and her brother escaped France and volunteered with the British war effort, both becoming radio operators. Her skill in radio operation is what led her to the SOE. Many in the executive were against Noor going into the field, not just because of that assessment that she didn't have the brains for the job, clearly nonsense, but more significantly, she was seen as unsuitable because of her Muslim faith and conviction. Noor was determined to never lie, an obvious disadvantage as a secret agent. She was also considered by assessors to be rather innocent, maybe even gullible, but no one was better with a radio, and the male radio operators kept getting caught or killed. So in 1943, Noor was parachuted by moonlight into France, and within 72 hours she was set up in Paris and transmitting messages back to Britain. Within a week of her arrival, the circuit Noor was part of was discovered, and Noor was advised to go into hiding and find a way home. She refused to go home, but lay low with a fellow SOE agent. She was the last radio link between Paris and London. Where most radio operators lasted no more than 6 weeks before being discovered, Noor continued sending and receiving vital information for over 3 months. She was constantly on the move, changing her hair colour and her appearance. She was nearly caught twice, but managed to get away, ironically, by telling the truth. One famous story tells how Noor was hiding in an apartment block where she needed to mount a radio aerial outside. She was caught by a German officer who lived there too, who wanted to know what she was doing with the radio aerial. She explained that she was bored and wanted to listen to some different wireless stations, and so he helped mount the aerial on the outside of the apartment block for her. You see, she wasn't lying. But Noor's luck ran out. She was sold to the Nazis for just 100,000 francs. They said afterwards that they would have paid a lot more for her. Noor was taken to Gestapo headquarters in Paris, and I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for Noor. But she, as always, surprised those around her. Noor immediately tried to escape. She was not successful, but a fortnight later she made another daring escape attempt with a fellow agent, but they were foiled by an air raid and were recaptured on the roof of the prison. Because of Noor's attempts to escape and her refusal to promise that she would not try to escape again, she was labelled a dangerous prisoner, classified as Nacht and Nebel, that night and fog classification. She was to be disappeared. Noor was kept in shackles and so could not wash nor feed herself for much of her imprisonment. She was regularly beaten and interrogated, but she never revealed anything to the Nazis. It was speculated that her escape attempts and her dark skin colour singled her out for the worst treatment by the Nazis. The Nazis never knew her real identity. To them, she was Nora Baker, her cover name. After 10 months in a German prison, Noor was taken to Dachau concentration camp, where she was subjected again to horrendous beatings and torture before she was executed. She was shot at point-blank range. The very last word that she uttered to her captors was "Liberté," freedom. It is said that on the night that Noor was executed, her mother and brother dreamt of her. In their dreams, Noor appeared to them surrounded by a blue light and told them that she was now free. In a future episode, I want to look more closely at this type of crisis apparition as they're known. Whether in dreams or waking apparitions, many during the World Wars reported experiencing them, and there's still a phenomenon reported to this day. In a kind of reverse crisis apparition, my great-grandmother refused to believe that her son, my granddad, who was reported missing in action, presumed killed during World War II, was actually dead. She claimed that she knew he was still alive. She was adamant of it, and was known by some to have second sight. Months later, she received word that he was in a prisoner of war camp in Austria. She was right to have not given up hope. Noor Inayat Khan was honoured in both France and Britain, though in Britain it was the George Cross that she was posthumously given, the highest civilian honour for bravery. Surely it should have been the Victoria Cross, the highest military honour. France's leader, Charles de Gaulle, said the following of Noor: "Nothing, neither her nationality nor the tradition of her family, none of these obliged her to take her position in the war. However, she chose it. It is our fight that she chose, and she pursued it with an admirable and invincible courage. There is now a statue to Noor Inayat Khan in Gordon Square, London, where she lived. And Noor was also featured as a character in an episode of Doctor Who, bringing her story of courage and determination to a new generation. I've just told you 2 stories of the SOE women agents. There are so many more to be explored. And on the show blog, I'll link to where you can find out more in books, podcasts, and websites. After the war. Within just a year or 2 of the war ending, RAF Tempsford was handed over to the care and maintenance wing of the RAF, held for a decade or more in stasis as such, just in case the Cold War led to a real war. The clinic at Tempsford Hall went back to being just that, a clinic. The hall was definitely used as a hospital during the wartime because we know that the airmen injured in the Pottonwood Liberator crash were taken there. But I could find out little else about its use during the war, because of the secrecy surrounding RAF Tempsford as a whole, I assume. The clinic continued to take civilian patients throughout the 1950s, but in the late 60s the hall was up for sale again. This time it was bought by the finance company Kia, who occupied the hall as their headquarters for decades, only recently vacating and selling the hall on. Some mystery surrounds who now owns Tempsford Hall, but more on that later. 21st century hauntings. In the last episode, I said that I thought the haunting from 1840 had lain forgotten for decades, but I did discover a newspaper article from the 1980s written by the Bedfordshire head archivist, which documents some of the creepy goings-on recorded by Mrs. Elliot back in 1840. It seems to be an article to tie in with Halloween and focuses on ghost stories in the archives. So it's not completely true that the haunting had been forgotten. Tempsford Hall's spooky side makes the news headlines again in the noughties, this time in a London Evening Standard's finance section. It runs a short article about how employees of Kia in Bedfordshire think their manor house headquarters might be haunted. There are vague mentions of footsteps and unexplained noises, but nothing much more. Around this time, there are also reports of a phantom airman and airwoman being seen in the hall, standing by the window. However, I have heard from a number of former employees of Kia, and here are some of the things that they have told me about working there. The hall was redeveloped by Kia over the years. A modern office block was added to the side of the hall, and it does look rather incongruous in pictures now when you see it. I'm not sure it's the kind of development that could happen today. In the old house, the large reception hall and some of the wood-panelled downstairs rooms, the former drawing room, for example, were kept as they were in the past and used for functions and offices for the senior leaders. But upstairs, the hall was converted into offices. Now, these offices today, they're wide open plan spaces, the kind that you'd find in any modern office block or complex in a big city. There are smart kitchen and breakout areas which dot the open plan floors. Now empty, they have that back rooms, liminal space, atmosphere to them, which is creepy in its own way. The employees that I've heard from seem to have had very fond memories of working there though, and I've been told that it was the old house where some unexplained occurrences happened. The cellar area, used for storage, was definitely a place that felt off. Now, this space today is whitewashed and brightly lit with strip lights and punctuated with heavy industrial doors, but it still has the alcoves for barrels and wine bottles down there. The cellar may also actually date back to the original house, the one built in the 1770s. To this day, there is still one spot within that cellar which is colder, considerably colder than the ambient temperature around it, and no one knows why. A good friend of Weird in the Wade got to visit recently for work, and he stood in the exact spot where this drop in temperature occurs. The area is very small. You step into it and you are chilled to the bone. You step out of it and the temperature returns to normal. Of course, there could be a natural explanation. We know that there was a well on the site and also good water. So maybe this part of the cellar is where the well was, or even a spring, maybe. Another area singled out was the grand staircase, where apparently unexplained footprints would appear. Others felt uncomfortable walking up and down those stairs as if they weren't alone there. The most commonly reported phenomenon was that of feeling of not being quite alone, as if the hall was full of people, when in fact it was quiet and peaceful. But what of the house now? It was up for sale, and Keir moved out some time ago. A newspaper article from earlier this year announced that the hall had been bought, but no details have been given about who has purchased it. But there is a lot of speculation about the whole area of Tempsford, and that's because Tempsford has been officially named by the government as a site of a new town. Tempsford New Town is proposed to stretch from the south of St Neots all the way down to the top of Sandy and spreading out east and west from the current Tempsford village. A new railway station is planned linking Oxford to Cambridge. The whole swathe of North Bedfordshire around Tempsford is going to change dramatically over the next couple of decades. Add into the mix Universal Studios, which is being built between Flitwick and Bedford on the site of an old brickworks, and you've got the making of not just an expansion in population around Tempsford, but so many more visitors to Bedfordshire as a whole. So as you can imagine, these plans are quite controversial locally, with most seeming to be glad of the Universal Studios and the jobs it will create, and the boost for the local community. Local feelings about Tempsford New Town is far more mixed, and it's understandable. I'm concerned about the loss of green spaces around Tempsford. I know there is a need for affordable housing in Bedfordshire, and again there's concerns around will there be enough affordable housing in this development. There are so many questions that haven't been answered yet about this development, so it is quite a controversial subject at the moment around Bedfordshire. I do wonder what will happen to the SOE Memorial Barn though. Will it become surrounded by a modern housing estate? Its preservation and the history of Tempsford itself is something I really do hope is a priority when this new development is planned and eventually built. One thing that I'm pretty sure about is that Tempsford Hall will be preserved. I believe there's a covenant in the Keir sale, which means that it can't be knocked down. But what the hall is going to be used for still remains a mystery. But finally, I have one other ghost story for you from Tempsford, and this was sent to me by a listener, and so I really wanted to include it here for you. Listener Lizzie got in touch with me on social media, and here's what she said. I lived in Tempsford Village for a couple of years. It was a very old house, and one night I was sitting on the sofa. The sofa was in the middle of the room, touching no walls. I was eating Maltesers and watching the TV, as you do. I dropped 2 Maltesers onto the floor and they rolled under the sofa. So I got down on my knees to search for them. I felt all the way under the 2-seater sofa, all around the legs. Nothing. So I mentally shrugged and I sat back down. 10 minutes later, I stood up to go to the bathroom, and as I walked past the sofa, 2 Maltesers rolled out from under it and came to a stop about half a metre away in the middle of the floor. The house was already making me feel a bit weird. It had 3 bedrooms and was long and narrow. The bedroom furthest down the upstairs corridor was originally intended to be my office, and it had a truly terrifying feeling to it, and ended up being a junk repository that I never went into unless absolutely necessary. I hated going down that long corridor. The second bedroom next to the scary one also felt a bit off, but not as much as that third bedroom. It was almost like a dark haze hung in the air around the door and in the corridor. If I was going between the bathroom and the bedroom, I would avoid looking down that corridor. Lizzie also told me that the house may have contained some of the remains of Tempsford's Chantry House, as a nearby property, Gannock's House, also received timber from the Chantry in the late 30s. Now, this was extensions to the original properties. These properties were really old. A chantry was a pre-Reformation form of charitable giving, and the one in Tempsford was paid for initially in the 15th century by 2 gentlemen. The purpose of a chantry was to house a priest who was dedicated to chanting or singing prayers to save the souls of those who donated. There is some fascinating history about this chantry on the Bedfordshire Archives website, which I will link to on the show blog, weirdinthewade.blog. The chantry building was timbered with an overhanging first floor in the medieval style that you'll still see in York's Shambles and in towns like Chester. After the Reformation, Henry VIII pocketed the income from all chantries, including the one in Tempsford. And the chantry in Tempsford became cottages, which were eventually part of Tempsford Hall's extensive estate. When the building was demolished in 1939, it would have belonged to Mrs. Wynne, Major and Millicent Stewart's daughter. Whether its timbers also found their way into Lizzie's old house, we might never know, but her experience sounds very unsettling. And before I end this episode about Tempsford Hall's more modern history, how does it relate to that haunting of the 1840s? In more recent times, the haunting phenomenon reported at the Hall has focused on its wartime history. Those airmen and airwomen seen by the windows in the old part of the Hall. But what about that devastating fire? Could that have cleansed or somehow stopped some of those strange occurrences which were happening in the earlier 19th century? I certainly haven't come across any reports that are as extensive as what affected the Elliots family after the fire. Or could some of what the Elliots and their staff experienced in the 1840s be explained by some kind of time slip type haunting phenomena? Were they hearing sounds from the fire and the Hall's future use during the wartime as a hospital? I'd love to be able to carry out some proper investigating at the Hall, but with its new buyer still a mystery, I am doubtful it will be something I'm able to do in the near future. I am certain that Tempsford has more secrets to share, and I may well be back in the village for future episodes. I didn't even get round to telling you about the pub there yet, and that pub, again, has a great history. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Weird in the Wade. Remember, the podcast will now be on a short break and will return on the 6th of July. So it's only just over a month to wait until Weird in the Wade returns. For this episode, I would like to thank Tess Savagear, Brian Bland and Owen Staton for playing parts within the fire scene. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Ash McCrudden, who carried out extra research for me into the SOE and RAF Tempsford. Thank you so much, Ash. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented and produced by me, Nat Doig, and the theme music was by Tess Savagear.
Hey everyone, I'm Erica.
And I'm Elizabeth.
We're sisters, wine lovers, and your hosts for the podcast Spirits Uncorked.
In Season 2, we're leaving the haunted waters of Lake Lanier in Georgia and diving into all new spooky stuff. Shadow people?
I've seen them.
Haunted military bases?
I've served on one.
Local restaurants with ghostly reputations?
I work at one.
Okay, if something spooky doesn't happen to you, I worry about you.
The paranormal is my normal.
Plus, we'll sip and chat with horror authors, fascinating guests, and test out some superstitions along the way.
Knock on wood.
So uncork a bottle and pour a glass of the paranormal with us on Season 2 of Spirits Uncorked.
Get ready for sips, scares, and sisterly sarcasm.
If you're enjoying the podcast you're listening to right now, and you've got a love of the paranormal, then I'm Rob Kirkup, and I think you might enjoy my show, How Haunted. Every other Friday, I take you to some of the most haunted locations across the UK, with the occasional trip overseas, as we explore the dark history behind each place, and the terrifying ghost stories said to haunt them. Across the year, there are seasonal specials too, including Christmas episodes packed with real listener ghost stories. And every October, the podcast goes weekly, a themed month building towards a big Halloween spooktacular. You'll also join me on real paranormal investigations, ghost hunts in seriously unsettling locations, with audio from the night so you can hear what happens as it happens. So if you're ready for creepy locations, grim history, and stories that follow you long after the lights go out. Search How Haunted wherever you get your podcasts. And join me as together we ask, How Haunted?